Talk Prospect Podcast. I'm your host, Nixon. This is episode 172. We're going to be covering MLB. We're going to be doing a buy-sell stock of MLB teams across the league, but we've chosen specifically what we thought were the most intriguing teams to talk about. But before that, joining me, as always, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Wein. How you doing?
I'm doing well. We're back from vacation. Hopefully you and everyone are staying cool, especially if you live in the state of Texas or anywhere in the South where it is very hot. Make sure you are staying hydrated. But the summer, you know what the summer means. We've entered the middle of the summer, the Midsummer Classic in baseball, or in other words, the 94th MLB All-Star Game is upon us here in 1.5 weeks. The starters for position players were announced tonight. Pitchers get announced Sunday, along with the reserves or the bench players, sort of like they do in the NBA All-Star Game. Baseball is at its mid-season point, as you're going to see. Most of the teams that we are going to talk about today have played at least 81 games, or 81 games exactly, which is exactly half of 162. So we are at the mid-season point. It's been about 3 months. We're entering July, and we're coming up on the All-Star break. So it is exciting. We're entering the dog days of summer of what was America's national pastime, and I think you can still argue it is, but there are arguments to be made now for football, I would say, for that title. And we're 1 month out from the trading deadline, so we need to take stock. It's time to take stock of MLB's most interesting teams, we think, at this point in the season, the mid-season point. We have 7 teams for different reasons, good and bad, everything in between. So hope you guys enjoy this episode. If you like stuff like this, if you like this episode, let us know, and we will keep doing it as the season moves towards the end of the season and we get closer to the playoffs. We will keep doing these type of episodes throughout the baseball season. Also, leave us your feedback. Share this with people who like baseball and who like sports in general. If we talk about one of your teams and you disagree with us, let us know. We like fan engagement. We want to create more of that. And check out our social media. So with all that being said, let's just jump right into it. I'm sort of going to randomize the order, keep us on our toes a little bit. But I think I'd be remiss and we'd be remiss if we don't start by talking about one team in particular for a couple reasons, but the main reason being Shohei Ohtani. And that would be the Los Angeles Angels. They've actually played the most games of any team that we're going to talk about at this point. They're past the halfway point of their season. They've played 83 games. And all these standings are updated for after today's games. So this is after today's games on June 29th, 2023. So nothing will change between now and when we're recording this podcast. 44-39, sitting pretty at 5 games above 500. That's a pretty good point to be right now. They're 1 game out of a wild card spot in the American League. They're sitting pretty. They've been pretty good so far. They're 6 games back of the Rangers in the AL West. They're only a game back of the Astros, though, in their own division. So they're up there, and they're competing for an AL wildcard spot at this point in the season. We have enough of a sample size now to where the Angels are a pretty damn good team. We think that they're going to make moves at the trade deadline, probably smaller moves at that, but it's good for the Angels because there were some at the beginning of the season that said if this Angels team is out of it by the All-Star break, they could consider trading Ohtani at the trade deadline to try to drive up his value and get as much as they could in return for him before he hits free agency eventually this summer. But at this point, I don't think they're selling. I think they could possibly be a buyer. I'm buying stock in Ohtani. I want to talk about him more, but I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to give the floor to you to give your thoughts on what the Angels are, where you think they are, and whether you're buying, selling, or just holding your stock, meaning you want to see a little more, but you're not selling on them.
Well, I've been someone that has, cracked jokes about the Angels in the past on this podcast, about them having obviously Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani on the team and them not being able to have a competitive roster around them. And so you got to give them credit, first and foremost. Just got to give credit to them. They've been a little bit up and down here as of late, probably as up and down as you could possibly be, with a 25-1 win against one of the worst teams in the league in the Rockies with 2 record-breaking innings, and then following that up by losing to that team 7-4 the next night. I mean, as up and down as you can possibly be. I think with this Angels team, it all comes down to just depth. Like, what are you getting from, the middle to the late part of that lineup, just in terms of consistency? And then pitching-wise, any team that's looking to buy needs more pitching. That's never, you can never have enough pitching in Major League Baseball. But I think for the Angels, it's more so, we've seen it in the past, teams that have multiple aces, specifically like starters. You see a lot of times in baseball, it's a lot of relief pitchers. You're having guys go out and pitch 5 innings and just give you spot innings here and there. But having starting pitching and specifically aces that can go 7 innings deep into a playoff game and be reliable, having multiple guys that can do that is extremely important in a playoff setting. And for the Angels, that's going to be where they can look to improve this roster.
You're exactly right. The offense has been good. The offense has been what drives this team. They've been one of the better offensive teams in baseball. When you look at their profile, they're 5th in on-base percentage, which means as a team, they're getting on base at a good rate. And in order to score runs, you have to have players on base so guys can drive them in. And they're getting on base, top 5 in the league in on-base percentage. They're 4th in OPS. So all around, they slug, they get on base, they hit home runs. They're 4th in home runs. Of course, a lot of that has to do with Ohtani and Trout, but they have other guys who are capable and have some pop in their bat. They're 6th in runs scored. They're 9th in average. So they're top 10 in pretty much all major offensive categories. Now, they don't have a ton of speed on the bases. That's something I think they could go out and get like a utility guy for the middle of that lineup, a speed guy. Because in the playoffs, you want to have guys who, when they get on base, can make pitchers think. Because it causes just different kinds of distractions and things go through the pitcher's mind and they can get distracted by that. You want to have guys that can steal base in the playoffs. You want to have some more speed. I think that's another area they could attack at the deadline. We're going to talk about the deadline so much more when it gets a lot closer at the end of July. We still have about a month to go, and when teams start making moves and rumors start swirling, which they're sort of starting to, but not really at a rate now where we have to talk about it. But this offensive profile, they're one of the better offensive teams in baseball. Trout is still really, really good. He's still a top 10 player in this league when he's on the field. He's hurt more than you'd like, but he's still really, really good. Still one of the better players that we've seen all time. It's just on his same team. Let me just put it this way. On June 29th last year, Aaron Judge hit his 29th home run. And last year, I think he was the rightful MVP. He led the league in pretty much every offensive category, and he had one of the greatest offensive seasons of all time. Like, that's universally agreed upon. He deserved the MVP because his season was that great. Ohtani won it the year before. Ohtani finished second last year behind Judge. He finished fourth in Cy Young. He still had a fantastic year. And it took one of the better offensive statistical production seasons in baseball history for Ohtani not to win the MVP last year. June 29th last year, Judge hit his 29th home run. He ended up hitting 62. Today, June 29th, 2023, Shohei Ohtani hit his 29th home run. Shohei Ohtani he's batting over 300. He leads the American League in batting average. He leads in home run. He leads the entire league in home runs. He leads in OPS. He's got almost a sub-3 ERA. He's got a 180 WRC plus, which means he's 80% better than any major league hitter. He's doing everything. He's having a historical season. He's batting 309 for the year. He's doing everything except play defense, but he does his part as a pitcher by keeping runs off the board. He goes out, he pitches every 5 days. He's going to make 35 or more starts. He's probably going to pitch to a sub-3 ERA. He's probably going to hit anywhere between 50, maybe 60-plus home runs, depending on, the pace. If this pace continues, it could be 60 or more. If he slows down a little bit, it's going to be above 50. He's going to hit 30 definitely before the All-Star break on the pace that he's on. I've seen 2 articles just browsing the internet in the past week that are not only claiming Ohtani as the best player in baseball right now, which he certainly is, but possibly the greatest of all time. Like, this guy, when it's all said and done, if he continues just doing what he's doing, could be the greatest baseball player we've ever seen, legitimately. And the Angels have 2 of those guys on their damn team. And I think this year, if they go out, make a couple moves, solidify their bullpen a little bit, with the emergence of Reed Detmers, who's a young starting pitcher that they brought up recently, with Ohtani, and some of the other solid starting pitching that they have, we could see this team in the playoffs, and they can make some noise. Nobody wants to see Ohtani and Trout back-to-back in a playoff series in that lineup. Just nobody does. So I like the Angels. I'm buying a little stock. I still want to see more. I want to see them sustain this going into the All-Star break. Like, I'd hate for them to drop back to 500 going into the All-Star break. Not next week, but the week after. But look, I think they've put themselves in a really good position. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think, to just go on the record, I'll say I'm neutral. But for the Angels organization, I mean, the ball is in your court. I mean, your stars are performing at the level you need them to. Now it's time to go out and make the move and bridge that gap between you and the playoffs. And I mean, as a casual baseball fan, there is nothing I want to see more than Shohei Ohtani in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think everyone wants to see this Angels team in the playoffs. And look, they're right there. They're 1 game out. Every team still has about 9 or 10 games before the All-Star break. We'll see where this goes. I believe they have – well, let's see what they have. The Angels, they have a 3-game series with the Diamondbacks starting tomorrow, and the Diamondbacks are a really good team that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. You want to at least get a game from that series. It is at home, which is good. And then they go at the Padres, who are really struggling, so that should be a good series. Then they're off, and then they have a 2-game set against the Dodgers at Dodger Stadium, going right into the All-Star break. So it's not the easiest schedule in the world going in, but if you can maintain this pace at about 5 or 6 games above 500 at the All-Star break, 1 or 2 games out of a wild card spot, you're in great position. So with that, the next team we're going to talk about, we're going to stay in the American We're actually going to go to the National League. I'm sorry. We're going to talk about the San Diego Padres. There are arguments to be made right now in baseball on who has been the most disappointing team. And I think there are 3 candidates, and all reside in the National League. Now, there are teams in the American League who aren't performing up to like their expectation, but none as bad or severe as in what's going on in the National League. The Mets, obviously, who dropped to 9 games below 500, 36-45 after tonight's loss. They look just absolutely terrible. That situation could get messy at the trade deadline. They could be a seller at the trade deadline. The Cardinals, who have been bad for most of the season for multiple reasons, we thought that team in our MLB preview was at least going to be in what's not the greatest division in the world in the NL Central, at least be a playoff team. For whatever reason, that team just has not come together. They're not performing well with the 2022 reigning NL MVP on their team, Paul Goldschmidt, and an all-time great third baseman, Nolan Arenado. That team just hasn't figured it out. And then the San Diego Padres are right up there with those 2 teams as the biggest disappointments in baseball. And you can make a really solid argument for all 3. When you look at the Padres, they've played exactly 81 games. The reason they're on this list right now is because of what's happened in the past week. They lose 2 out of 3 to the Washington Nationals, who are one of the worst teams in baseball, along with the A's and the Tigers and the Rockies. And then they got swept by the Pirates. The Pirates started hot. They had a great month of April. They were leading the NL Central at some point. They've kind of flatlined here in the month of June and dropped back to the pack a little bit, dropped back to what maybe more realistic expectations for the Pirates were, but they're still, pretty good for this version of the Pittsburgh Pirates. The Padres were swept in Pittsburgh. So they've lost 5 of 6 games. They're 7 games below 500. And conversations are starting to swirl about, you think about this Padres team and you think about their top 4 guys. They got 4 beasts. I mean, Machado signed long-term at third base. Tatis is signed long-term. He's back to Tatis form. That's good. They got Xander Bogaerts at the shortstop position in the offseason. He's struggling right now, but he's still one of the better all-around hitters in baseball when he's producing and has had a pretty good season. Soto is the one guy that they haven't given the long-term extension to, and he's arguably been the best hitter on this team. But this team does not look like a team that can go out and win a World Series. So right now I'm selling on the Padres. I don't see how they get this together. They're not getting a whole lot of production outside of their top guys. Their pitching's been pretty good, but I don't know. I think they need to go on a little run here before the All-Star break to get back around 500 to even have conversations about potentially giving Soto a contract or maybe trying to buy at the deadline to make a run. But I just don't know.
Yeah, this is my first year following baseball more closely, and the thing that I've learned the most from following baseball really over the past few years, just from watching postseason baseball and just watching this year, is that baseball is really weird. It's a little bit like golf in the fact that it's just, you can have streaky moments, but it's different in the fact that it's a team sport and you could just have, all it takes is one hit and you could find it. Or for a pitcher, all it takes is one pitch and you can find it. It's really strange in that way. So am I going to count them out completely? No. Should I? Maybe. I think for me, I can't look at the talent and not be a little bit hesitant to count them out. It's just hard for me to do that just because we saw them make it to the NLCS last year without Fernando Tatis Jr. and without, having the continuity with Juan Soto in the locker room for that long, really. So it doesn't look good right now. In fact, it looks really, really bad. But I don't know, man. I don't think they're gonna win a World Series, but if they make it, if they somehow sneak into a wild card spot, I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, it's just the only thing is sitting halfway through the season, 8 games back of a wild card spot, like it says at the bottom of your screen. It's not the place you want to be right now.
Right.
That's a lot of ground to make up. I don't think people understand. Like, you can't just make up 8 games in a heartbeat. You got to have other teams fall off a little bit. You got to go on a big winning streak. And I just don't see any signs of life from this team right now. Now, maybe they turn it around. I got to see what their schedule looks like going into the All-Star break. And look, the bright side is they have the talent. Like, they have the necessary amount of top-end talent, both on the pitching side with, Yu Darvish and Blake Snell, who's been fantastic this year and will probably be an all-star. Joe Musgrove. Like, their rotation is good. Their bullpen is pretty good. Their pitching is good. And they have guys who, if they perform to the back of their baseball card or even close to that on a consistent basis, can drive this offense. I mean, that top 4 in the lineup alone can drive an offense by itself. But in the playoffs, things change. You're going to be facing the best pitchers. And you got to be able – I've talked about this in baseball episodes past. You got to be able to have guys at the bottom of that lineup who can get on base and set up your better guys at the top. Like, that's how things work. It can't just be, oh, Juan Soto hits a home run here. Oh, Machado hits a home run here. No, you got to have guys who can get on base in the second half of that lineup and cause havoc. And I think they have guys, but it's not happening for whatever reason. And if it's not happening in the regular season, how am I supposed to believe it's going to happen against the best pitchers in the playoffs? It's just baffling because this was a team that was in the NLCS just like 9 months ago. So we'll see where it goes. I'm not counting them out, but I'm definitely selling a little Padres stock right now with how things are going. I want to go back to the American League and talk about the New York Yankees, who we haven't really talked about this year since like when the season started. They've played exactly half their season. And look, when you look at the record, 45-36, it's pretty good. Like, considering they've been without Judge here for 3 weeks, it's pretty good. But they're 9.5 games back in their division. Of course, the Rays have been incredible this year. They're sitting third in their division, pretty comfortably ahead of the Red Sox, who are in last place, but a game or two above the Toronto Blue Jays, who they've sort of been neck and neck with all year. They're sitting in a wild card spot right now, sitting pretty in a wild card spot. If the playoffs started today, they would have a playoff spot with the Orioles and the Tampa Bay Rays. But the reason I want to talk about the Yankees is the timeline on Judge coming back. And, well, let me back up a little bit. Yankees were one of the hottest teams in May. They had a not so great April. They came out of April like a game above 500. But they had a really great May. Judge went on one of his tears. He was really good. He looked like an MVP candidate again. they sort of hit a wall. They beat the Dodgers in Dodger Stadium the first series in June, 2 out of 3. But in that series, Judge made an incredible catch running into the wall and right. But in the process, tore a tendon in his toe and has been out ever since that Dodgers series where they won 2 out of 3 and things were looking really, really good for the Yankees. But since that injury has kept him out, this offense has just been, for the most part, aside from a couple games, 2 of which were against the worst team in baseball, the Oakland A's, the past 2 days, offense has not been good at all. It has been, in fact, pretty bad. You look at the stats without Judge, they're last in the league in just about every category. Yeah, they're worse than the Oakland A's in just about every category. Now, that might have changed since they just played the Oakland A's and they put up 23 runs in 2 days. Things might have changed since then, but regardless, this offense has not been good. It's baffling because they have guys in this lineup that have produced before. I mean, Stanton's a former MVP. Donaldson's a former MVP. Gleyber Torres is having a good season. DJ LeMahieu is a guy who, if he performs to the back of his baseball card, is one of the better contact hitters in baseball. Volpe has struggled, their young shortstop, but this offense, for whatever reason, just hasn't gotten it going without Judge. And since the timeline is uncertain on Judge, I mean, he could be back. The optimistic outlook, I think, is the start of August. So we still got another month because those toe tendon injuries they take a long time to heal. I mean, we're talking about another 3 or 4 weeks at least that Judge is out. And for the Yankees, it's about keeping yourself above water, which they're doing a decent job of, but the offense has to get going. So the good thing for the Yankees, the last thing I'll say is pitching has been incredible. They've got the best bullpen in baseball in ERA, in WHIP, in runs allowed per 9. The bullpen has been nails. They don't have like a go-to closer right now, but they have a bunch of guys who are capable, and they kind of just mix and match based on matchups. And I think Aaron Boone does a really good job of that. Although I don't like other aspects of Aaron Boone's management of this team, and Yankee fans are all over it. But in the starting pitching, I mean, Cole's a Cy Young. He's right in the thick of things for Cy Young. Severino's come back, and aside from a start or two, has looked really good. Rodon, the guy they signed in the offseason, he's going to be back next week making his first start. And when he looks good, he's an ace. Like, he's a number one on most other pitching staffs. So with Cole and Rodon, Severino, Nestor Cortez, Domingo Germán, their 5th or 6th starter, just threw a goddamn perfect game last night. This pitching staff, they got it. Like, usually at the trade deadline, we're talking about the Yankees going after pitching because that's what they've lacked, in the past. But this year, they need a bat or two. And that's scary considering this team they've always been near the top of the league in on base and getting on base and slugging and home runs. Now, they're still hitting home runs, but they're not getting on base, and that's concerning. So offense just needs to get it going. And if it does, they could put themselves in a pretty good position for when Judge comes back in 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, and a DH here or there could be all it takes. Bringing one guy into a locker room, it can provide a spark of energy that maybe they need. You never know how these things can really affect hitting production, because a lot of it is mental with these guys. They already know what they're doing. They're in the major leagues for a reason. A lot of it is between the ears most of the time. But the Yankees, you got to feel good about where you're at. There's no reason to really be, overly high or too low. This is a team that can still win the World Series. I really believe that. And with the pitching staff they have, as you mentioned, I mean, I think the Astros have the best ERA in the league, best team ERA in the league, I believe. But I mean, the Yankees have a pitching staff that is right up there with them.
The thing about this Yankees team is the good thing is if the Yankees get a lead, through 5 or 6 innings, it's likely that if the Yankees throw their best arms, it's lights out. Like, you're done because the bullpen's been that good. That's the good thing. You have to have a good bullpen, I believe, to win a World Series. We've seen that in the past, and they have that. And they're going to have, you think about a 3-game wild card series, which is likely what we're looking at. I don't think they're going to catch the Rays for the division. Without Judge for another 3 or 4 weeks, I just don't think that's going to happen. Although I do think the Yankees are going to be a playoff team, maybe one of the top wild card teams, in fact, with how the Astros are sort of struggling right now. And some of the other teams are, you can't definitively say right now that in the wild card race, there is a team like definitively better than this Yankee team when they have Judge. When you look at a 3-game wild card series with Garrett Cole going game 1 and then Carlos Rodon going game 2, and maybe like a Luis Severino or Nestor Cortez or Domingo Germán, who, when he has his stuff, can flirt with no hitters and perfect games. Like, I feel pretty confident in that. With a lineup that still has Judge, Stanton, Rizzo, Bader. They just need to get it going a little more offensively here in the next couple weeks to maintain their spot. Because if they don't, and the pitching regresses for 2 or 3 weeks, which is totally possible in a long baseball season, they could find themselves in a weird position. That's all I'm saying. Okay.
I'm going to say one more thing. I'm going to buy stock on the Yankees just because this is the first time in a while where I feel like they are going to be overlooked heading into the playoffs, just because they're going to be in a wild card spot, most likely. And the fact that Judge has been out, the fact that their bats haven't been as sharp, I think this is a team that could peak at the right time. And a lot of times you see a team in the wild card spot, they win that first series, they get a little momentum, and then from there, things really get to another level.
Yeah, and look, when we look at the overall AL wild card playoff pick or AL playoff picture at the halfway point, and look, it took 3 months to get to the halfway point. It's going to take another 2.5, 3 months to finish this regular season. So there is a long way to go. And with how quickly things can change in baseball on a day-to-day basis, with injuries and ups and downs of the baseball season, like a team could have a 4-game losing streak and find themselves out of a playoff spot at this point. We don't know what's going to happen. There's still a long way to go. But right now, looking at the Yankees' schedule going into the All-Star break, they have a 3-game set with the Cardinals in St. Louis this weekend. They need to win 2 out of 3, at least there. Then they have a 4-game set in the Bronx starting next week with the Orioles, who are 4 games ahead of them in the division right now. It'd be awesome if they could win that series 3 out of 4, but right now in baseball, it's so hard to win a 4-game regular season series, especially against a team as good as the Orioles are. Even when you're playing at home, it's just hard to win a 4-game series in the middle of a baseball season. It's just how it works. I'd love if the Yankees could just split that series. If they can do those 2 things, take 2 out of 3 from the Cardinals, maybe even sweep them, who knows, and then split with the Orioles, Yankees are sitting in a great position going into the All-Star break, because I believe they get the Cubs after that. And the Cubs, they're not bad, but they're not great. So I like where the Yankees are sitting, even though the offense at times is just almost unwatchable for whatever reason. Let's talk about the Diamondbacks. they're a fun team this year. Right now, 82 games in, 48-34. Think about that. 48-34. There are only a couple teams in baseball that have more wins than the Arizona Diamondbacks do. Those would be the Atlanta Braves in the National League and the Tampa Bay Rays in the American League. They are right up there. They have been all season. It's been an awesome first half for Arizona. And I'm happy that we're seeing a couple new teams in this race for the playoffs. I think it's good for baseball that some of these teams with lower payrolls are really exceeding expectations this year for different reasons. I mean, we're talking about the Diamondbacks. We're going to talk about the Miami Marlins. We're going to talk about the Cincinnati Reds. There are some other teams, the Orioles. I think it's really good for what the Rays are doing, although we've kind of seen it before from the Rays. It's not like as surprising as these other teams. But the Diamondbacks, man, they're really fun, really young roster, really fun to watch. They're actually 2.5 games ahead of both the Dodgers and the Giants in their own division, although the Giants are playing good baseball right now. This Diamondbacks team, 14 games above 500 at this point in the season, that's really damn good. I want to buy stock in the Diamondbacks just because they have so many great young players and they have a good young pitching staff. Look, I don't know if they keep up this pace in the second half, but they've set themselves up well for the second half of the season. And I think with a move or two at the deadline, shoring up the pitching staff, maybe going out and getting not a top of the market bat, but just another bat that can do some different things for you. I think this Diamondbacks team is going to be there at the end. They've shown nothing to say that they won't be. Of course, injuries can happen and stuff can happen, but that stuff we can't predict. I think this Diamondbacks team is really solid. They have a lot of different skill sets. Corbin Carroll made the All-Star team. He's another new young star in the game of baseball. I really like this Diamondbacks team. They hit. They competed their ass off with the A's this past week. Or not the A's, the Rays. Sometimes I get those mixed up. I'm buying stock on the Diamondbacks. This is a team that I want to watch moving forward, going into the second half of the season, and that I think will be a really entertaining watch if they can get into the postseason, which they're in a great position to do so.
Exactly. Yeah, this is who they are at this point. I know I said the Padres, they might turn things around, but the Diamondbacks, I see them hovering around 15 games over 500, 10 games over 500 for the rest of the year. And that will be good enough for a wild card spot. Whether they end up ahead of the Giants in their division or not, that's yet to be seen. But I do think this team in a playoff setting could be very, very tough out. They're just balanced all the way around. I mean, as you mentioned, solid pitching staff, a good mixture of skill sets throughout their lineup. Like, they don't just all hit for power or just all just dink singles. I don't know the term for baseball. You know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, we get it. No, you're right. Last thing I'll say on the Diamondbacks is you look at their offensive profile. They're just like the Angels. They're one of the better offensive profiling teams in the league. They do a little bit of everything. They dink singles. They hit home runs. Fourth in batting average. Like, they hit the ball. They're putting the balls in play. They're eighth in on base percentage. They're getting guys on base. They're fifth in OPS. So they're slugging. They're hitting for extra bases, meaning they're hitting doubles. They're hitting triples. They're fifth in runs scored. So obviously they can score with the best of them. They're 12th in home runs, which is still top half of the league, and they're third in stolen bases. That's the thing that stands out to me is they have guys that when they get on base and they get on base at a high clip because they're, eighth in on base percentage, that can wreak havoc on the bases and cause a lot of stress for opposing pitchers. That's what you want in the postseason. You want differing skill sets throughout your lineup. You want guys that have some pop. You want guys that are contact bats, guys that can steal bases. That sort of thing works in today's game. And look, maybe the rules that were put in place this year for baseball that were intended to create more action in favor of offenses, since pitching has been so good the past couple of years in baseball, leading to a rise in strikeouts. Maybe even though it's not necessarily creating more hits, although it is, maybe the unintended consequence of banning the shift of the pitch clock is that these younger teams are playing better. And I don't know, maybe the rule changes have played a factor in all these up and coming younger teams having more success is what I'm trying to say. I know I didn't word that in the best way, but I think it's something that could be looked into. The Diamondbacks aren't the only one. The Marlins are 14 games above 500. And there's some other teams, like I mentioned, the Orioles, the Rays, even the Rangers, who don't necessarily have the lowest payroll in the world, but, they just got 4 all-star starters in the American League All-Star game. It's incredible what the rule changes have done for baseball. That's another talking point for another day. Let's move on to the next team. And that, I think, is going to be the Seattle Mariners. If the lower third comes up. Now, they have not quite reached the midpoint of their year. They're 79 games in, but they're sitting 3 games below 500, 5 games back of a wild card spot in the American League, where you have a bunch of pretty good teams competing for those 3 wild card spots in the Yankees, the Astros, the Angels, the Blue Jays. The list goes on and on. The offense isn't clicking for the Mariners. The pitching has been pretty good with some of their younger arms headed by Luis Castillo. But this is not where I thought coming into the season that the Mariners would be at this point, almost halfway through the season, sitting 5 games back of a wild card spot. It's a little concerning.
Yeah. This Mariners bullpen is unbelievably good. They don't give up home runs ever, pretty much, and that's a attribute that contending teams kill for. So they have that in their favor. The problem is, as you said, they can't connect the bat to that dang ball at all. They can't get on base. They're just struggling offensively in every single aspect. And there was times where their bats would go cold last year, but it was never extended periods of time like it is right now. So when I look at the Mariners, it's hard for me to feel great about them considering how good the AL is, how deep the AL is. And on top of that, I just think there's a reason to believe the other teams that are ahead of them are just simply more talented offensively.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in your line of thinking there. And look, not just in the American League, how about in your own division right now?
Yeah.
Look, the Rangers have been great all season, and they're going to continue to be. I don't see any reason that team's going to slow down. I mean, they might be the best offensive team in baseball. They're right up there with like the Braves and the Rays for being the best off, and the Orioles for being like juggernaut offensively. I mean, what that team's doing, they have the American League starters in the All-Star game at second base, shortstop, third base, and catcher. That's 4 out of 5 spots on the infield that they have the best players basically in the American League so far this season. They are a juggernaut with Corey Seager and Marcus Semien in the middle of that lineup, who last year struggled a little bit, especially in Marcus Semien's case, but now they're going. And they're getting pitching, and even without DeGrom, they have not slowed down. And they're probably going to buy at the deadline. Like that's a front office that the past couple off seasons has shown more of a tendency and a willingness to be aggressive. So I'd expect that even though they haven't really gone out and spent been active at the trade deadline the past couple seasons, they're finally, I think, in a position where they're going to go get better at the trade deadline, or at least attempt to, even if it's a couple smaller moves to shore up their bullpen or their pitching. Then you have the Astros. You have the Astros who, look, they're not necessarily playing the greatest brand of baseball right now, but they're without Yordan Alvarez, and they've been without Jose Altuve for a lot of this season. And those are like arguably the two most important bats in their lineup. Like Yordan Alvarez behind Ohtani and Judge is one of the best. He's a top 5 hitter in baseball. And of course, you mentioned earlier in the episode that they've got the best team ERA. So that team knows how to pitch. They have experience in the postseason. They're probably gonna, with Altuve playing more, and what's his name, Alvarez coming back after the All-Star break, they're gonna take off here pretty soon. Like that's too good of a team not to start playing better here pretty soon and taking off. Then you have the Angels, who we talked about earlier, and are going to be in the hunt. Then you get to the Mariners, and that's just within the Mariners' own division. Those are 3 playoff caliber teams right there that could all go buy at the deadline and get better, theoretically, or get more talent. So you can't necessarily rely on one of those teams to fall off. And with the bats here in the now, I'm not going to count the Mariners because they had the magical year last year. They really took off near the end of the season. They could sneak into a wild card spot, or at least get themselves like more in the conversation than they are right now. And they have capable bats in their lineup that we've seen do it before. I mean, they went out in the offseason and they got a Teoscar Hernandez for the Blue Jays for the middle of their lineup, a power hitter. They have Julio Rodriguez, some other guys who have done it before, Suarez, Kelnick. I mean, the list goes on, but it just hasn't happened for whatever reason. I like the pitching, though. I really do like the pitching. Luis Castillo was a big move at the deadline last year, and he's a bona fide ace. I mean, he's that guy. And then they have a bunch of young arms behind him, but they sort of like the Yankees, but to a more concerning extent, because the Mariners aren't going to have a player, of Judge's caliber that they can just insert back into their lineup come August as like a potential trade deadline addition, an in-house trade deadline addition. Mariners don't have any reinforcements coming anytime soon. They've been healthy for most of the season. So these guys are going to have to start playing better. It's just as simple as that. There's nothing really else that I or you can really say. But they're not dead. I'm sort of like lightly selling stock, but I'm sort of holding my stock. I'm not completely selling. I'm selling a couple shares of stock, but I'm not completely selling on the Mariners.
Yeah, the clock is ticking on the Mariners for sure. I'm holding at the moment, but my hand is on the button, if that makes sense.
I'll say this. If we get to like middle to late July Like, if we get to win, NFL training camps are starting, like July 18th-ish, right? And they're not back to at least 500, I'm selling all my stock at that point. But right now, I'm still holding on to a little bit of it. But as you said, you put it perfectly, the clock is ticking. So here's what we're going to do. It's been really good conversation. We have 2 teams left, but I think we're only going to have time to talk about one of them, because if we talk about both, it's going to go well over an hour. And I don't want that. And we have plenty of time here in the upcoming weeks to talk about some other teams and some other things going on in baseball, which we will. Would you rather talk about the Reds? I'll give you the option. The Cincinnati Reds, who are 81 games in, they brought up a bunch of really good young prospects. They've been one of the better teams in baseball in the month of June. They're 43-38, tied for first in the NL Central. Or would you rather talk about the Miami Marlins, who are second in the NL East, 6 games back of the Braves, who you can make an argument are the best team in baseball, but are sitting in a wild card spot comfortably and are 48-34. In the last 2 times that franchise has been at least 14 games above 500, both years have gone on to win the World Series. Which one would you rather talk about?
Interesting. I originally would have said the Reds, but let's talk about the Marlins a little bit. I think with their ultimate ace, Alcantara, and just the amount of talent that's just showing up right now, and we can't really go without talking about that.
Yeah, when you look at the Marlins, they have a guy in their lineup who not a lot of more casual baseball fans know, but he's going to be in the All-Star game this year. He's their second baseman, Luis Horizon, who they traded for in the offseason, or right before the season started, from the Twins. And he, for most of the season, has had a 400 batting average. Like Judge was chasing 62 home runs in the AL home run record last year. He's chasing like a batting average record. He's one of the more interesting stories in baseball right now. If you haven't seen him, go look him up. He's one of the more interesting individual storylines outside of the obvious ones like Ohtani in baseball right now. And you have a guy like that in the middle of your lineup with a bunch of other young talent and some guys who have done it before. I'm not sure let me pull up their roster real fast. Miami. And it's exciting for Miami. I mean, the Marlins have been bad for a while now, and they haven't had really a MVP caliber hitter since they had Giancarlo Stanton in the year that he hit 59 home runs before he was, traded to the Yankees. So it's exciting for Miami fans to have something after the Heat lose the finals, to have something to root for until the Dolphins season starts, maybe even after that. So good for the city of Miami that sort of all 3 sports teams in the area right now are pretty damn good. You look at the Marlins, though, there are a couple names that you recognize in this lineup if you've been following baseball at all for the past, 3 or 4 years. Jorge Soler is a guy that hit a couple moonshot home runs in that Astros Nationals World Series a couple years back. He was a big reason why that Nationals team went on to win that World Series. And then Jazz Chisholm Jr. is one of the better young center fielders in baseball right now. Gene Segura is a guy who is a veteran and played a long time for the Phillies. They signed him in free agency. They've got some guys. along with some really good young prospects that they've brought up. They're really solid defensively, and their pitching is excellent. They've got one of the better young rotations up there with like the Mariners and a couple other teams in the entire league. I think they could still use a little more pop in their lineup if they really want to go for like an NLCS or maybe even a World Series. Because as I mentioned, the past 2 seasons that the Mariners have been at least 14 games above 500, or like the only 2 seasons in their franchise's history before this year that they've been 14 or more games above 500 at any point in the season, they've won the World Series, which is something to think about. I'm not saying they're going to do that this year, but it's something to think about. I mean, I could do the same thing with a lot of other teams, right? I mean, Domingo Germán just threw a perfect game last year, or not last year. God, it's late, guys. I'm all mumble jumble. He threw a perfect game last night, and the last 3 times, or the only 3 times before this, that a Yankee pitcher has thrown a perfect game. In those 3 seasons, the Yankees went on to win the World Series. So, like, I could do that sort of thing for a lot of different teams in baseball, but they're just interesting to think about. I think this Marlins team is a bat or 2 away from maybe putting themselves in a position where they could get to an NLCS like the Phillies did last year, who we really didn't expect them to at this point in the season. But this Marlins team, they set themselves up in great position. I'll say that much. And with teams in their own division struggling, Nationals are bad, Mets are terrible. Like, you could see a situation where, like, you're still going to have the Dodgers. Probably you're going to have to win probably a series against the Dodgers. You might have to win a series. You're going to have to get through Atlanta, who's an absolute juggernaut. But Miami could be a tough out come playoff time.
Absolutely. And I believe there is a series going on right now between Miami and Atlanta. That'll be pretty telling as well. One thing I will say is the NL has had a trend in the past few years of teams that seemingly came out of nowhere, made a few moves at the deadline, got hot, and then with a few clutch bats and ace pitching, made World Series runs. So if that's the trend that's been happening, then the Marlins have to be in the conversation.
Absolutely. I'm just happy that in a league where in the past it's been so top heavy, like in terms of teams that can actually go and win in the playoffs and teams that are typically buying at the deadline, right? I mean, in the past it's been the Braves, they go out and make moves at the deadline, or bigger market teams like the Yankees, or I know the Mets are struggling right now and are pretty bad for whatever reasons, but like those bigger market aggressive teams that you typically go out and see make moves at the deadline, there are going to be more teams involved this year, which I love because it's more to talk about and it's more interesting that way. I mean, you have a bunch of young teams in the Marlins and the D-backs who we talked about on this podcast, but the Orioles and the Rangers. There's so many new players this year, and I think it's good for baseball. So I'm buying Marlins stock. I'm buying D-back stock. I'm selling my Padres. I'm selling some Padres stock, not all the way, but selling some. I'm selling a little on the Mariners, and then I'm sort of holding but low-key buying on the Yankees and the Angels. So that's where I stand. And next week we'll probably do something associated with the All-Star game, just because it's a big event in baseball season. We're not going to be able to do the episode this year where we predict the All-Stars because they're actually going to already be announced. But we will do something. Maybe we'll do our home run derby bracket in like a Patreon episode or something. That'll be fun to talk about. We can talk about some of the players in the All-Star game. We'll do something with the All-Star game, but with NBA free agency starting tomorrow, officially, and with the draft just last week, we got to recap that. We're going to have a lot of basketball content between now and next week, so keep an eye out for that. And then once we hit July, keep an eye out for a lot of football content, as football is right around the corner. So it's our favorite time of year, almost. So with all that being said, that's going to do it for this episode of the Raw Prospect Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe. Emmy, any parting shots?
Yeah, I just said football's coming up. Pretty soon we'll be in Ohio, I think. Pretty soon we'll be in Canton for the Hall of Fame game. Can't wait for that. Yeah, that's it, man. Go dink some singles, people.
So just like the chances of my ability to be able to speak comprehensible sentences at this hour of night, we are going.
Peace out.
Peace out.